Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Mr. Harry Gross, a savant of great repute, who has many good opinions, often from the left, but not always. Many come from other places. So we can, I think, get some good insights. Now, the world is certainly going down different directions than it's done in the past, slightly. These things are happening, quite shocking. And so the United States relationship with Venezuela has been contentious, lots of things happening. If you want to call him the Noriega or the president or Moderna, whatever. Did I get his name right?
Maduro,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Trump, they have these tensions. And then the U.S. issue with Cuba is quite complicated. And I know you've spent a lot of time in Cuba, and I will, as we get into this rather complicated conversation, one of the things that interests me is communism, if you want to say that, and its relationship with Christianity. So I would say, particularly the traditional Marxian view, religion is the opium of the people, so they're going to violently suppress. In the Stalin world, religion would be violently suppressed as much as they could. And then I know the Episcopalian Church, as you have a role in that the Episcopalian Church has a farm, if I have that right, in Cuba.
Yes.
And there's been an effort to try and help the Cuban people. I think that's a fair statement. Okay. And maybe you could just talk about that a little bit. So as we get into the conversation, so and the idea it would be that as communism, at least one side of it is we're going to take from the rich and give to the poor. From if you have excessive property or goods, then it would be your moral responsibility to give them to the poor people, and the poor people would only ask for what they needed, whatever that is. So that's a way the situation was supposed to work, and it didn't, I have to say. But the idea is that's not so contrary to that part of it is Christian views. The issue is force in taking. If people can be persuaded morally to do the correct thing, that's maybe Christianity is in that wheelhouse. But if I think the communist system would sort of require these events to happen, and they have to exercise power to do that, and all these issues happen. But right now, as we discuss these two countries, the Christian role in these two countries, I'm not sure that I totally know about it, but I know the Pope has come to Havana in the past.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And what exactly is going on? Particularly, most people are traditionally Catholic there.
Yes.
How is that working out? I mean, in these two countries.
So in Venezuela, I can't speak too much on the religious situation. It's traditionally Catholic as well. But in Cuba, you have a weird religious mix. Officially, the government's atheistic.
And do they celebrate Christmas?
They do.
Is that a national holiday?
It's a culturally national holiday, yes.
I mean, does the government close down?
I don't know if the government closes down. I mean,
right,
officially,
like U.S., the post office is closed.
Yeah, probably, and they give somebody days off. But there is a sizable atheist population in Cuba, and the government has, over periods of time, cracked down on, then liberalized kind of its relationship with religious institutions. The country's majority Catholic. There's a sizable population within that Catholic, I'm using quotes, practicing Santeria. Instead, there's a small but growing batch of Protestant denominations as well. So a lot of kind of mainline Protestants like the Episcopal Church that have a presence, but you also have Baptists, Methodists, Evangelicals, Pentecostals, the like, that have come in. The Episcopal Church has had a weird relationship with the country, with the Cuban government, because it has, and at times rightfully, been seen as an arm of America at present. Because the Episcopal Church is the American church, and so as religion with the United States has, kind of moved around at various points, the Episcopal Church has either been suppressed or had some of that pressure taken off over time. The Cuban government itself I would say it's not anti-religious, it is anti-religious power. It is fine with religious organizations existing so long as they do not seek to supplant, antagonize, or replace the government.
Or dispute the government's worldview.
Yes.
So any dispute. And one of the things that interests me a little bit is charity. So if you have if the state is doing everything, it takes care of, there is no reason to have charity. Now, presumably the Episcopalian Church sends money in as charitable donations into Cuba. But are there charities, religious charities, where you say, okay, Cubans or whatever, why don't you give us money, and we're going to use that money to do our own viewpoint of what's charitable. So I think, I know that the military is, the people in the military are having drinking problems or something like that, and so we're going to do something outside the government to do something for military alcoholics. I mean, I'm making that up, of course. So the idea of charity and religious power, that's quite a barrier, I would say. If you it's such a very poor place. Who has money to give away? And so the government says I think this is the case. You don't really have any responsibilities to help the poor. We do it, and we don't like you using your resources to improve the world by your lights.
Well, I would actually contrast that. The government's fine with that because that fits in line with their ideology, right? That, look, we're hand in hand serving the proletariat. We are together lifting up the people to make this country better. The issue is more as the church is an institution, right? Particularly the Catholic Church in particular, where you have a source of loyalty outside of the state, a source of authority outside the state to listen to. So, right, for the Episcopal Church, you have the presiding bishop in New York, Washington, D.C. Then you have, for the Catholic Church, the Pope, right, outside. One of the reasons why non-denominational Protestantism has thrived in Cuba is because there is no hierarchy. There is no outside.
Indeed, in Latin America.
In Latin America, across the board.
In Latin America.
And so authoritarian governments are very okay with that because there's not an institutional challenge to that power, that sort of wealth. So, like, for example, in Cuba, we can look at one of the things the Episcopal Church has been a real effort to do is to build water filtration systems in rural areas and towns.
Do they have to get government permission to do that?
Yes, they have to get government permission to do that, and it's funded by the Episcopal Church and outside charitable donations.
So there's no money involved. In a poor country, you're going to do something.
And the government looks at that and says, great, that's money we don't have to spend doing that. We can redirect that money so that,
get some more police.
More policemen, maybe a doctor.
Right.
But there's a different, Cuba until 1989 to 1991 was an incredibly wealthy society. The Cuban Revolution had dramatically upended the socioeconomic status of the country. And had turned a very poor, very backward country into one with one of the highest reserves, what we could call human capital in the Western Hemisphere. A very rich place, but it was dependent on Soviet subsidization.
So the Soviets gave money, so they just got a lot of money. And of course, they had the 1990 or so, everything blew up.
Everything blows up.
And really, I mean, I've been there some, but not as nearly as much as you, or I'm just sort of more of a kibitzer. But my time there, it was quite shocking. I was quite shocked about the standard of living, the whole deal, and the fact that some extraordinary number of people have left, whatever the number is, millions. 25% of the population, or whatever kind of number you want to pick, and then getting a sense of what the GNP has done. It's just terrible, and its a benefactor was Venezuela. So the two are really
for a time. So after the Soviet Union collapsed, the entire 1990s is called the special period.
Yes,
because the economy collapsed by in some places at least 33%, upwards of 50%. In places, just whole wealth reserves destroyed overnight.
Right.
Then when Hugo Chavez came into power in Venezuela, in I think 2002, 2003,
or
somewhere
90, maybe 99,
late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere in that line. he was a member of, again, this kind of radical socialist ideology.
Right.
And he formed an alliance with Cuba, whereby Cuba would use its vast human capital reserves that Venezuela did not possess and provide medical workers. There was something called a cultural exchange where you would send artists, musicians, the like to teach and to provide school teachers effectively. They provided security services.
Just so, I hope you didn't leave that out. Some of their vast secret police. So we need secret police to come down here and arrest anybody.
The Cuban DGI is very good at what they do.
And we can't trust, this recent incursion, the Venezuelans could not trust the Venezuelans to protect their leaders. So we have this Praetorian Guard. The Cuban people are going to, soldiers are going to come down here, and their secret police are great. They've locked Cuba down. We're going to use the secret police to do the same thing. And so, I mean, I can understand good and bad happens all the time. Maybe I would accept that. But the methodology that's going on here, and as witnessed by these millions of people that have left both countries, and one could say, well, the U.S. is the real culprit here, and its policy could have, I accept the fact, there's a substantial part of it. On the other hand, just the inefficiencies, the extraordinary methodology these countries use. For instance, putting the military in charge of petroleum production in Venezuela. You can imagine the corruption that takes place, which is an important part, isn't it? So if you're trying to purge the temple, so to speak, we have a revolution, and traditional Christianity is basically been corrupted and immoral. And so anywhere capitalism has appeared, whatever word that means, or the idea of people pursuing money for money's sake and the excesses that happen and the inevitable way that the system can crush the lower classes. Lower is a bad word, but economically diminished classes. So all these things are bad. We're going to change that, and we'll do whatever it takes to change that. And indeed, I think the tensions in each country, the sociological tensions were absolutely extraordinary. And I mean, I've occasionally met big dogs from Latin America, and they really have an extraordinary sense of entitlement, and they deserve a better place in the world. And everyone else, it's sort of their destiny to be servants. Something like that. And race plays a major part of it, too, a big part of it.
Yeah, the Creole mindset has not left Latin America.
Right. And so that's right.
There is a hereditary ruling class that deserves to be in power. And it's where, if you look at like Latin American populism versus European populism, European, and I would say American counts in this instance, is inherently exclusionary. It's about keeping certain people out. Latin American populism is the opposite. It's about bringing people in because they've had you've had kind of opposite trajectories, where in kind of Europe and then North America, you've had a breakdown of traditional aristocratic structures. Well, in Latin America, that same breakdown has had much more trouble occurring. And it has not been helped by foreign involvement across the board. Where there has been a form of feudalism, effectively, what I would say not even capitalism, but feudalism, that has persisted since independence for Latin America across the board. And it's still kind of at the root of so many issues. And you replaced colonial feudalism with neo-colonial feudalism by foreign companies. And then that's been replaced by revolutionary movements that just put their own new form of feudalism in place. And there has really been vast struggles in trying to create a more equitable division of society. In some places, you can completely understand it. Cuba was one of those places where you were going to have some sort of radical society emerge. It was the jewel of Spain's colonial empire, and so was governed very tightly in that place. It was also the last bastion of slavery in the Western Hemisphere. That even when Spain had abolished slavery nominally, they could not really enforce their will on Cuba at the time. And there was this very much landowning, semi-feudal elite that survived and was very restive across every group that has tried to control it. Then they were replaced to some degree by American companies. United Fruit Company owned, I think, 25% of the island, that land. It was then the United States intervened 19 times between 1904 and 1959.
That's when they got their alleged independence.
Yes,
so
1904.
They no longer became an American
Yeah,
colony.
they were an American colony from 1898 to 1902, and then were fully granted their independence in 1904, although the Platt Amendment in the Constitution gave the United States the right to intervene anytime American economic interests were deemed to be threatened. And when Batista came to power in the 50s, he kind of shot the place. He had been the golden boy. He had been America's pick, but he was also seen as the outsider. He was a mixed race man who had kind of challenged the status quo. He had liberalized the country, the 1940 Constitution, had left power as this great reformist figure that the United States approved of and would let make change. But when he decided to stage a coup in 1952, that changed everything. And he forced, I think, Cuban society to alter itself. Under the Castro regime, the trade-off was that domestic rights would be allowed to be suppressed and freedom would be traded for economic advancement, for literacy. That balance basically became untenable in the 90s. Chavez and the Venezuelan alliance made it tenable again, sort of, and the country was beginning to turn a corner in the teens and 20s. That market reform, the Castro regime was ending. Raul was stepping down. The next generation, that was the first non-revolutionary generation, was supposed to come in and take power. They were beginning to liberalize the economy. They had begun to allow small businesses to exist. They had removed price caps on gasoline, oil. They were beginning to create a free market economy in small sectors, and then COVID hit and destroyed the entire island's economy because it's dependent on tourism. That was the trade-off. They lost civilian, they needed tourism, and that forced the government to clamp down even further, and more people left because there was no way to fix two special periods in a row. And they became fully dependent on Venezuelan oil. The entire Cuban economy depends on oil because their energy system runs on oil. They don't use coal-fired plants. They don't have any nuclear plants. They don't have natural gas, but they have oil plants. And they produce some oil, but they only produce enough oil to power about 25% of their electricity needs. And so they have made all sorts of trade-offs domestically and in foreign policy to make sure that they still had cheap Venezuelan oil flowing in.
You know, there's a lot to be said about this whole situation. I mean, the path that the Cubans exist now is terrible.
Yeah.
It's going to, it's terrible, and a substantial part of it, in my opinion, is the way the past has impacted the present. And so there was, I think you rightly said, a plantation economy, which I think is a big thing to consider. So in countries where the mercantile, the impact of cities and trade and people figuring ways to get money a different way than owning land, that really changes things. But in Cuba, where you have the way to make things work is you have to have land, you have to have that. That's your capital, and it's almost impossible to enter that situation where you're a landowner doing that. The logistics of saving enough money in those circumstances to do it are very, very difficult. So that arrangement, I accept the fact that these plantation type countries where agrarian arrangements are the way that wealth is produced and the way that land is passed along, it really closes doors. And that's in some ways a marker of feudalism, the way things worked in Europe in the 13th century or whatever. You possessed land or you did not, and if you did not possess the land, you were just basically dependent on the labor, whatever the labor produced, and it was never enough money to produce capital to buy land or obtain land. And so the different class systems were extremely rigid, which were also provoked by the race card there. So we have all those tension issues. Well, when everything blew up, the hatred titers were extraordinary. What people, you don't have to look far in Macon, Georgia, or anywhere where Cuban refugees came. And so anybody that was in an upper class arrangement just left. Everybody left. The people were there, whatever they are. The new leadership class and the new status hierarchy appeared, which was based on sort of absolute power, whatever, and the relationships they had with these other countries. And so part of the sort of mindset was that the U.S. are wicked, and whatever the deal is, and property is wicked. And just my brief experience there, they have the red, whatever you'd call the red gang in school children, the red guard, whatever they are, wearing little red bandanas. And so the information that people receive, or as best the government can do it, or it's just 1, 2, 3, we're really going to do this, and we're going to do something very bad to you if you go out of your lane where your acceptability. So the government is extremely whatever they are, and opposed to the West, opposed to the U.S. For many reasons, complicated reasons. And in my time in Cuba, brief time, one thing that puzzled my wife, I was watching the Cuban television, looking at the propaganda, obviously in Spanish, so I didn't do very well with it, listening to it. But the story with, they mentioned a lot about Venezuela. So it's a great place. This is what happened in Venezuela, and their view of history was just presented endlessly on television. This is what happened. The Americans said, we beat them, we did this, we did that. They're the wicked, devilish people. Well, and of course, the economic facts that exist now with so many people outside the country, people literally close to starvation. I mean, I don't know if that's an understatement. And you mentioned the different special arrangements that occurred. Well, we're in a third one now with the U.S. embargo on the Venezuelan petroleum coming in.
Yep.
And it's a very difficult situation. Now, you mentioned tourism. Another thing to say is prostitution. I mean, I think one of the major, and which is not commonly discussed, maybe always there's a certain money that comes from tourism. So, and wherever you have a large tourist mechanism, well, an undersurface is a prostitution.
But
so one of the things
before we get on this, I'm going to stop you there. Prostitution in Cuba works very differently than in other places. It's often state supported.
Yes.
The real money in tourism has nothing to do with prostitution or hotels. It's in currency value, right? 1 Cuban peso is officially worth 27 US dollars. That's the official exchange rate. Euro is about the same, it's more like that. The average wage is about 15 Cuban pesos an hour, somewhere like that to some degree. You make about $20 a month in that.
Yeah,
what you
that's right.
So if an American tourist comes in and gets in a taxi, and the taxi driver hears English and goes, just starts turning the meter up and charges the equivalent of $5 US to a tourist. The tourist goes, $5 for a taxi? That's great. Here you go. And now they have made a quarter of a month's wage off of one drive. The most interesting conversation I've ever had in my entirety of 8, 9 years down there was I was studying abroad, and I was translating for a girl who was getting her fortune told on the study abroad trip.
Right.
And the fortune teller and I were talking afterwards, and she used to be an economist for the government.
Right.
And she realized she could make 4 times her yearly salary telling fortunes to tourists.
Right, of course.
Because, not because out of prostitution, but just because the exchange rate was so much that, you have a tourist coming in, here's $10, here's 20 euros, here's whatever, and you have made a year's salary.
That's correct. I mean, I think you're right about that. And so I made a half joking comment about prostitution, but nevertheless, so if you get $10 or whatever the fees are, that's a tremendous amount of money floating around. And so that was like a lifeline. The other lifeline is the money coming in from Miami. The money that's the large Cuban communities basically keeping the place afloat. And I think the issue is complicated how they get their money in there. I mean, there may be some nuances about.
You have to physically bring cash
and
down. Or what often happens is rather than bringing money down, what usually happens, because every time you get to Havana Airport, the customs area is packed.
Right.
Because what you don't do is you don't usually bring cash down. You don't send remittances. You go and you visit and you say, hey, we're bringing grandma a new TV.
Right.
We're bringing grandma this.
Right.
You buy the things that they cannot get in Cuba easily or are too expensive to get in Cuba. You buy them in Miami in the U.S. and then you just fly them over.
So just looking at the situation right now, I mean, we could go back and forth about the situation that exists, which is a complicated kind of story.
Yes.
And I think at least I've heard this argument, which is, well, this is maybe, and you spoke about it, this is our hemisphere, we're going to exploit the place, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, if you thought it was a World War II, so if it was 1939, shall we say, and the Nazis were in Latin America, if you look back at some of the U.S. propaganda films about, just before World War II broke out, the idea is there were large Nazi parties, particularly in places like Argentina and Chile. So they've got a large infrastructure there. And so the U.S., in this potential World War situation, they've got to control the continent. We can't have people coming up into our backyard, and so we have to do that. So now, at least some of the reasons that are being presented, maybe the similar situation with the Nazis in 1940 and the Chinese, you could say Communist Party. I'm not sure that's the right word. Yeah. We talked about words. Is that the right word for the Chinese Communist Party?
It is still the Communist Party, but
it's not the right, some other word.
It's politically communist. It's not
else.
Economically communist.
It's something else.
I would say, though, there is a similar scenario, but we've handled it differently. In 1939, we actually changed our tactic. We had been using things like the Roosevelt Corollary to justify military intervention in these countries to do that. FDR switched to what we call the good neighbor policy, where he realized if you want to keep the Nazis out, because the Nazis were coming in because they could, with reason, tell these people, hey, we'll protect you from the Americans. So FDR realized if we could just make nice and show that we are not going to bully them, that we are going to treat them as sovereign, they will not actually have any reason, because they don't like the Nazis any more than we do. They won't be desperate enough to turn the Nazis, and it worked. It worked really well as that policy. In the Cold War, we actually sort of did that to some degree. We had groups like the Peace Corps, USAID were established, and yes, they were very much used to subvert some areas. And I joked when I saw the list of USAID closures and what was getting defunded. There was a small program in Havana, and I went, oh, well, I guess the CIA just lost their last office in Havana, because that was the price that was kind of agreed on for some of these things. But we had tried to win hearts and minds, and the way you did best with communists, where we actually had the greatest success in fighting communism, were in places where we rebuilt the economy in a way that was more perceivably more fair to the people, so they were not desperate enough to turn to communism. The way you beat the Chinese would be to do the exact same thing, because most people would rather do business with us than with the Chinese, because the Chinese don't do business fairly. They give you great discounts, they offer you really good deals, and they turn around and they use what we call debt trap diplomacy to force you to surrender what they had just built. Or they'll say, hey, we'll build you a road, but we're only going to use Chinese laborers to do this. So your people are not going to see a dime of the money that we're investing. It's not going to go into your economy. It's going to stay in our economy. Most people would much rather do business with us.
Well, just on that point, Harry, good neighbors, whatever. Well, certainly the arrangement that's taking place as we're getting near our end of our show, so to speak. Maybe I don't know if that's the right word, but our interchange. So in Venezuela, the idea was the Chinese or the Russians or who knows, whatever, they were attempting to do deals. How successful they were is another matter. But the idea is, okay, we're going to we're not good neighbors particularly to the regime there. We're the big boys, and and the other thing would be, you don't understand pleasant, benign behavior. The only your deal is we're going to the way secret police. We shoot people. We do this. We do that. We're not exactly nice
They need
guys.
secret police because our pleasant, benign behavior overthrew 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different countries in Latin America between 1952 and 1980. We've had Operation Condor where the CIA was authorized to assassinate any communist within any country. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there was reasons for the paranoia for these groups.
Well,
that we were not being good neighbors. We made them desperate enough.
I think it was
turn.
instinctive to if you've come out of the hills and the enemies have killed your brother, which is I think the case with the present head of the Venezuelan government, the female there, her whatever brother was killed or relatives were killed. So the hatred, the fight, there's war. Mm-hmm. You're the bad guys. Well, we're in power. We know that if we lose power, you'll kill us. We know we'll all be killed. And so that's our deal. It's life or death. Mm-hmm. And so our guys are going to do whatever it takes to control the situation. And if somebody comes in and say, let's all be buddies and whatever, and the government has that mindset, then it's not going to work. And so maybe dictators understand power. They seem to. A little easier than they might understand good neighbor. I mean, not to say that they might not, but I mean, nevertheless, the situation seems to be in Venezuela and in Cuba too, I think. I'm not sure how easily the governments are going to go along with good neighbor.
Let me explain what good neighbor policy would mean. Let me explain what that would look like. For example, instead of what we have right now the United States has more leverage over the Cuban government than we've ever had in the current regime, because we hold their economic lifeblood in our hands. Good neighbor policy would be to say, hey, instead of embargoing you, we will now sell you oil, and we will continue at a discounted price. We'll keep you alive, and in exchange, let's talk about some market reforms. Let's ease other risks. We actually tried this under the Obama administration, and it was beginning to work. It was really working. We ended wet foot, dry foot policy. Cuban immigration began to decrease in the United States. There were less refugees coming in. The economy was beginning to turn. The government was beginning to liberalize. And then in 2016, we stopped. And we turned all the pressure back on. And the government reacted accordingly. That for a brief moment in time, there was hope. That we were seeing progress.
Well,
governments like this don't turn on a dime. It takes time, and you have to be able to have faith that as Jose Marti called it, the giant with the 7 lead boots to the north will have the political stability that they can be trusted. And right now, that is lacking.
I'll let it go at that. I mean, trust is a two-way street, and I don't know if I particularly am willing to trust either the Venezuelan government or the Cuban government, whatever the word means. Now, I think one can trust but verify. Is that the right
exactly.
phrase?
No,
I mean,
trust is slow to build, takes a while to earn, but it requires good faith, earnest efforts on all parties.
Right. I think on that note, we've got to conclude our conversation. Right. We'll have another one.
Yes,
so,
sir.
Thank you so much for your good insights.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks. Right.